The moon of Kale 4 was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. It was a dead rock, floating at the edge of human space, far from any trade route, far from any planet worth visiting, and far from anything that could be called exciting. The only reason anyone cared about it at all was because of Outpost Maru 7, a small military station built into the gray stone of the moon's surface. 46 people lived and worked there. Their job was simple. Listen, watch, report. That was it. Private Yuna sat on her bunk in the lower level of the outpost, her legs crossed, and a small screen balanced on her knee. She was 20 years old, and this was her first posting in deep space. Back home in Busan, her mother had cried at the shuttle port and made her promise to eat properly and sleep on time. Yuna had laughed and told her not to worry. Now 3 months into her deployment, she understood why her mother had cried. Space was lonely. The walls were metal. The food came in sealed bags, and every day looked exactly like the one before it. She was writing a letter home, something she did every week, even though the signal took days to reach Earth. "Dear Mom," she typed. "Nothing new here. The food is still bad. Sergeant Wanjin tried to make stew yesterday, and it tasted like engine oil mixed with sadness. I think he used actual engine oil. I miss your cooking. I miss rain. I even miss the traffic noise on the bridge near our apartment. Tell Dad I said hello. Tell Jinho to stop using my room as storage. I will be home before he knows it." She paused and looked at the metal ceiling above her. She added one more line. "I am safe. Please do not worry about me. Nothing ever happens out here." She sent the letter and lay back on her pillow. 2 levels above her, Captain Taeho sat in the command center and stared at a row of screens, showing nothing interesting. Taeho was 38 years old, lean and quiet, with a calm face that rarely showed what he was thinking. He had been a soldier for 16 years, and had served on 3 different outposts before this one. Maru 7 was supposed to be his last assignment before he retired. A peaceful end to a long career. That was what they had told him, and so far they had been right. The command center was small. 4 workstations, a central display table, and a coffee machine that made a terrible grinding noise every time someone used it. Lieutenant Hana sat at the communications desk, leaning back in her chair with her boots on the console. She was 31, sharp-eyed, and had a habit of saying exactly what she thought, which made her either the best or worst person in any room, depending on your taste. "Anything?" Taeho asked without looking away from his screen. "Nothing," Hana said. "Same as yesterday. Same as the day before. Same as every day since we got here. I am starting to think the galaxy forgot we exist." "Good," Taeho said. "Forgotten is safe." Hana smiled and went back to reading something on her personal screen. The command center hummed with the low sound of machines doing their work. It was a boring, comfortable sound. The sound of a place where nothing bad had ever happened. Down in the maintenance bay, Sergeant Wanjin was cleaning the outpost's only real weapon, a twin railgun turret mounted on the surface above them. Wanjin was 45, built like a wall, and had a face that looked like it had been carved from rock and then hit with a second rock for good measure. He had fought in 2 border skirmishes during his career, and had the scars to prove it. Most people at the outpost were a little afraid of him, which he seemed to enjoy. He wiped down the railgun's targeting sensor with a cloth, and muttered to himself about dust getting into everything. The turret had never been fired in combat. It was there as a formality, a small set of teeth on a station that was never supposed to bite. But Wanjin maintained it every single day, as if war was coming tomorrow. That was just who he was. The rest of the outpost moved through its evening routine. People ate dinner in the small mess hall. A group played cards in the recreation room. 2 technicians argued about which Earth city had the best food. Someone had put music on the speakers, a soft old song from Seoul that made the metal corridors feel a little more like home. Humanity had been in space for about 300 years. In that time, they had spread to dozens of star systems, built colonies and stations and trade hubs, and met several alien civilizations. Most of those meetings had gone well. Humans had earned a reputation in the galaxy as a polite and practical species. They traded fairly. They kept their promises. They smiled a lot. Many alien species considered them unremarkable. Hard-working, certainly, but not threatening, not dangerous. Just another mid-level civilization trying to make a living among the stars. What the galaxy did not know, what almost no one knew, was that behind the smiles and the trade agreements, humanity had spent 3 centuries quietly building the most terrifying arsenal of weapons any species had ever created. They had learned from their own history. They knew what happened to the weak. They knew what happened to those who could not defend themselves. So they prepared. They built weapons that could crack planets, weapons that could tear open the fabric of space, and one weapon so powerful that its very existence was classified above top secret. They built all of this, locked it away, and prayed they would never have to use it. But they kept the keys close. Tejo leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. It was almost time for the night shift to take over. He was about to stand up when a small light blinked on the edge of his sensor display. He frowned and leaned forward. It was a gravitational reading, faint and irregular, at the very edge of their detection range. Probably nothing. Cosmic debris. A drifting asteroid. He logged it and marked it as background noise. An hour passed. Tejo was in his quarters, halfway through removing his boots, when his communicator buzzed. It was Wanjin. "Captain, you need to come back to the command center." Something in Wanjin's voice made Tejo stop. Wanjin was not a man who got nervous. In 16 years of service, Tejo had never heard worry in that voice, until now. He pulled his boots back on and walked quickly through the corridors. When he arrived, Wanjin and Hana were both standing at the sensor display. The gravitational anomalies were back, but they were no longer faint. They were strong, organized, and moving in a tight formation directly toward Kale 4. "How many?" Tejo asked. Hana looked at him. Her face was pale. "Over 200 signatures, Captain. They are not asteroids." Tejo stared at the screen. 200 contacts, moving fast, heading straight for their little moon in the middle of nowhere. His jaw tightened. His eyes went cold. The calm, boring evening was over. Everything was about to change. He reached for the intercom, and his voice echoed through every corridor, every room, every bunk in Outpost Maro 7. "All hands, battle stations, this is not a drill." In her bunk on the lower level, Yuna heard the alarm and felt her heart stop. She grabbed her boots, pulled them on with shaking hands, and ran. The Veldra fleet came out of faster-than-light travel, like a swarm of dark metal insects pouring through a crack in the sky. 214 warships, ranging from small fast corvettes to massive cruisers covered in armor plating and weapon arrays, arranged themselves in a wide half-circle around the moon of Kale 4. Against the black emptiness of space, their hulls glowed faintly with the heat of their engines. They were enormous. They were patient, and they had come for blood. On the bridge of the Veldra flagship Iron Thang, Warlord Tovik stood at the center of his command platform and looked down at the tiny outpost on the moon's surface with the kind of expression a boot gives to an insect. Tovik was tall even for a Veldra, with thick gray skin, 4 arms folded behind his back, and eyes like polished black stones. He had destroyed outposts before. He had burned colonies. This was nothing to him. A small station with a handful of humans. It would take minutes. He opened a wideband communication channel. His voice, deep and grinding like stone dragged across stone, echoed through every speaker in Outpost Maru 7. "Human station. You are surrounded. Surrender your facility and your personnel immediately. You have 60 seconds. After that, there will be nothing left to surrender." In the command center, Taeho listened to the message and said nothing. Hana looked at him, waiting for orders. Wonjin stood by the door with his sidearm already on his hip. The rest of the night shift crew stared at their screens with wide eyes. No one spoke. "Captain?" Hana said quietly. Taeho moved to the communications console and activated the emergency beacon. It was a Priority 0 signal, the highest level of distress call in the United Human Navy. It meant one thing: we are under attack. Send everything. The signal shot out into space at faster than light speed, aimed directly at UHN High Command. Then he turned to Hana. "Start a live data stream. Everything. Every sensor reading, every camera feed, every sound. I want High Command to see exactly what happens here. Every second of it." Hana's fingers moved fast. "Stream is active. They are receiving." "Good." Taeho turned to the crew. "We cannot fight a fleet of 200 ships. We are not going to try. Our job right now is to survive long enough for that signal to matter. Everyone who is not essential to defense, get to the underground bunker. Move." He never responded to Tovik's demand. On the Iron Fang, 60 seconds passed. Tovik waited with his arms folded. When no reply came, he did not ask again. He simply raised one hand and brought it down. "Burn it." The first volley hit Outpost Maru 7, like the fist of a god. Plasma fire, bright blue and white, rained down from the Veldra cruisers and struck the outpost's energy shields. The entire station shook. Lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. The shields held. Barely. A second volley came, then a third. Each one was stronger than the last, as more ships joined the bombardment. The shield generator screamed with a high-pitched whine that could be heard through the walls. Warning lights turned red across every console in the command center. Wonjin did not wait for orders. He ran through the corridors and up the access ladder to the surface turret, sealed himself inside the gunner's pod, and powered up the twin railgun. The targeting screen lit up with hundreds of red dots, each one a Veldra ship. He picked the closest 3 corvettes and opened fire. The railgun roared. 2 slugs of hardened tungsten flew across the vacuum at incredible speed and punched straight through the first corvette's hull. The ship broke apart in a silent flash of fire and debris. Wonjin shifted aim and fired again. A second corvette exploded, then a third. For a brief, beautiful moment, the humans hit back. But the Veldra were not impressed. They were angry. A focused beam from one of the cruisers locked onto the turret position and fired. The blast tore through the surface above Wonjin's pod and ripped the railgun apart. The shockwave threw him against the wall of the pod. He felt something snap in his arm, tasted blood, and then everything went dark for a few seconds. When he opened his eyes, the turret was gone. He crawled back to the access ladder with one working arm and pulled himself down into the station. Below ground, the corridors were chaos. Emergency lights cast everything in a dull red glow. Smoke poured from a ruptured ventilation line. People ran toward the bunker, some carrying wounded, some bleeding themselves. The sound of impacts above them was constant, a deep, steady hammering that shook the floor with every hit. Yuna ran through it all. Her ears were ringing. Her hands were shaking. She had trained for emergencies, but training was nothing like this. In training, the walls did not crack. In training, the screams were not real. She turned a corner and found 2 of her bunkmates, Jihuan and Somin, lying in the corridor. A section of ceiling had collapsed on them. Jihuan was not moving. His eyes were open, but he was gone. Somin was pinned under a metal beam, conscious and crying, reaching out with one hand. Yuna grabbed her hand and pulled with everything she had. Another soldier appeared beside her, a technician named Unji, and together they dragged Soman free and carried her toward the bunker. The shields failed at the 8-minute mark. After that, the plasma fire hit the station directly. Entire sections of the upper level were torn apart. The medical bay was destroyed. The mess hall, where people had been playing cards an hour ago, was now open to the vacuum of space. The communication array on the surface was smashed, but it did not matter. The data stream had already been sent. High Command had seen everything. Tejo stayed in the command center until the last possible moment, watching the screens die one by one as cameras were destroyed. When the ceiling above him cracked and a support beam came down, it caught him across the back and pinned him to the floor. Hana pulled him free, but he could barely walk. She put his arm over her shoulder and half carried him through the smoke-filled corridors toward the bunker. "The stream," he said through gritted teeth. "Did they get it all?" "Every second," Hana said. "They saw everything." At the 14-minute mark, the main structure of Outpost Maru 7 collapsed. What had been a functional military station was now a field of twisted metal, shattered concrete, and fire. The Veldra fleet continued firing for 2 more minutes, just to be sure. At the 16-minute mark, Tovik raised his hand again, and the guns went silent. On the surface of Kale 4, nothing moved. Smoke and dust drifted across the ruins in the thin atmosphere. It looked like a grave. But below the surface, deep in the reinforced underground bunker that had been built for exactly this kind of disaster, 19 people were still alive. They sat in the dim emergency lighting, some wounded, some in shock, all of them breathing the stale recycled air that the backup life support system pushed through the vents. Tejo lay on the floor, with his back swelling purple and his jaw tight against the pain. Hana sat beside him, checking the bunker's short-range communicator. Wonjin leaned against the wall, his broken arm hanging at a bad angle, his face showing nothing. Yuna held Salmon's hand and stared at the wall, still hearing the screams in her head. They were alive, barely, and they had nothing left. 16 minutes, that was all it had taken. Far away, on the bridge of the Iron Fang, Tovik reported his victory to Overlord Rashan. The Supreme Commander received the news from his throne room on a Veldra military station, his thick fingers tapping the arm of his chair with satisfaction. "The station is destroyed," Tovik said. "No survivors detected on the surface." Rashan smiled. Beside him, Scribe Lura, a thin and cautious Veldra who served as his chief advisor, stepped forward and spoke carefully. "Overlord, our sensors detected a high-priority transmission from the station before it fell. It was aimed at human military command." Rashan looked at her. "And? The humans know what happened. They know it was us." Rashan leaned back in his throne and waved one of his 4 hands. "What will they do? Humans are traitors and diplomats. They will file a complaint with the Galactic Council. They will make speeches. They will do nothing." Lura opened her mouth to say more, but the look in Rashan's eyes stopped her. She lowered her head and stepped back into the shadows. She had read the old reports. She knew what the analysts had written about the humans centuries ago. She knew the warning that had been buried and forgotten. But Rashan did not want to hear warnings. He wanted victory, and he believed he had it. Admiral Kyunsu was dreaming of his daughter's wedding when the alarm woke him. It was not the normal alarm, the soft chime that meant a routine update or a schedule change. It was the deep, low pulse that vibrated through the walls of his quarters and made the glass of water on his nightstand tremble. Priority 0. He had not heard that sound in his entire 30-year career. He had hoped he never would. He was on his feet and dressed in under 2 minutes, By the time he reached the bridge of the UHN Dreadnought Baekdu, his senior officers were already assembled, their faces tight with something between confusion and fear. The Baekdu was one of the largest warships humanity had ever built, a massive vessel carrying over 3,000 crew members, and enough firepower to level a continent. It was stationed in deep space, far from any border, because its purpose was not patrol or defense. Its purpose was response. When something went wrong, truly wrong, the Baekdu was the answer. Commander Jisoo, the bridge operations chief, handed Kyung-soo a tablet as he sat down in the command chair. Priority 0 beacon from Outpost Maru 7, Kale 4 sector. 16 minutes ago. Full data stream attached. Kyung-soo looked at the screen. Then he said, "Play it." The main display lit up with the feed from Maru 7. It started with the sensor readings showing 200 ships appearing out of nowhere. Then the exterior cameras picked up the fleet, a wall of dark metal surrounding the tiny moon. The audio came through, Tovik's voice demanding surrender. And then the silence from the outpost. Then the bombardment began. The bridge crew watched without speaking. They saw the plasma fire rain down. They heard the shields failing. They heard the railgun fire and the brief moment of defiance before the turret was destroyed. They heard the screams in the corridors. They saw the shaking camera feeds, showing people running through smoke, carrying wounded, falling. They heard a young woman's voice, panicked but determined, shouting for someone to help her move a beam. They saw the main structure collapse, and then they saw static. 16 minutes of footage. The bridge was silent for a long time after it ended. Kyung-soo's face had not changed throughout the entire recording. His officers knew him well enough to be afraid of that stillness. A man who shouted when he was angry was predictable. A man who went quiet was not. He stood up slowly. "How many survivors?" "The bunker's emergency beacon is active," Jisoo said. "We are reading 19 life signs. Life support is functioning but degraded. They have maybe 12 hours of air. Send a rescue group. Fast cruisers, full medical teams. I want those people out of there alive. Now show me the intelligence file on the Veldra Dominion." The display changed. Data filled the screen. The Veldra were a militaristic species that controlled a large section of the galaxy's eastern arm. They had been expanding aggressively for over 500 years. In that time, they had conquered 14 other species, absorbing their worlds and resources into the Dominion. 3 of those species no longer existed at all. The Veldra had wiped them out completely, not through war alone, but through systematic destruction of their populations, after they had surrendered. The galaxy knew this. The Galactic Council knew this. And no one had ever done anything about it, because the Veldra were powerful, and standing up to them was dangerous. Kyung-soo read through the file without expression. Then he closed it and turned to Jisoo. "Get me Dr. Mirai. Tell her to come to the bridge immediately, and tell her to bring the Nova file." "Sir, I do not know what the Nova file is." "She does. Go." 20 minutes later, Dr. Mirai walked onto the bridge. She was a small woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and glasses that she was always pushing up her nose. She did not look like someone who built weapons. She looked like someone who taught physics at a university, which she had done before the Navy recruited her 15 years ago. In her hand, she carried a sealed datapad that required 3 separate biometric scans to open. Kyung-soo gestured to the display table in the center of the bridge. "Show them." Mirai hesitated. She looked around at the officers, most of whom were watching her with confusion. Then she placed the datapad on the table, pressed her thumb to the scanner, looked into the retinal reader, and spoke her authorization code. She connected it to the table's display system. A diagram appeared above the table, a 3-dimensional model of a star, rotating slowly. Around it, orbiting paths showed planets, moons, and stations, a normal solar system. Then a small red dot appeared near the star, and the simulation changed. The star began to collapse. Not explode, not go supernova. It simply folded inward, shrinking, darkening, as if something was pulling it into itself from the inside. Within the simulation, the collapse took 4 minutes. When it was done, the star was gone. In its place was a point of absolute darkness, a micro-singularity, a tiny black hole that immediately began pulling everything around it inward. The planets cracked and spiraled. The moons shattered. Everything in the system was dragged into the void and crushed into nothing. The bridge was completely silent. Mireille spoke carefully. "This is the Nova Protocol. It is a weapons system that fires a concentrated pulse of dark energy into the core of a star. The pulse destabilizes the fusion reaction at the star's center and causes a cascading gravitational collapse. The star does not explode. It simply ceases to exist. Everything within the star's gravitational influence, planets, moons, stations, fleets, is pulled into the resulting singularity and destroyed. Total time from activation to complete system collapse is approximately 4 to 7 minutes, depending on the size of the star." One of the younger officers, a lieutenant whose name tag read Sung-ho, raised his hand slowly. "How long have we had this?" 62 years, Mireille said quietly. "It has never been used." Another officer spoke up. "Is there a less extreme option? A targeted strike on their fleet? A blockade?" Kyung-soo answered before Mireille could. "The Veldra Dominion has over 12,000 warships spread across their territory. Their homeworld is defended by a permanent garrison of 2,000 ships. A conventional military response would take months to organize, and would cost us tens of thousands of lives. And at the end of it, we would win, but the Veldra would rebuild. They always rebuild. They have been conquering and destroying for 500 years. No one has ever made them stop." He looked around the bridge. "I am not interested in making them stop for a few years. I am not interested in a peace treaty they will break the moment they feel strong again. 46 of our people were at that outpost. 27 of them are dead. 19 more are trapped underground, with 12 hours of air, praying that someone is coming to save them. The youngest of them is 20 years old." He let that sit for a moment. "I am authorizing Nova. Target is the Veldra Homestar." Mireille closed her eyes briefly. She had known this moment might come. She had spent 15 years hoping it would not. But she nodded and entered her authorization into the system. Kyung-soo entered his. Jisoo, as the third required officer, entered hers with a trembling hand. The order was confirmed. A single stealth ship, the Dokdo, was dispatched from the Baekdu's hangar bay. It was a small, fast vessel designed to be invisible to every known sensor system. Its crew was 5 volunteers who understood that getting close enough to a star to deliver the Nova device meant they would not be coming back. The mission was one way. Later that night, Kyung-soo found Mireille alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she was not moving. "Having doubts?" he asked. "Billions of people live in that system," she said softly. "Civilians, children, people who had nothing to do with the attack." Kyung-soo stood beside her and looked out at the same stars. "I know. I will carry that. But I watched that recording, Doctor. I watched their ships fire on a station full of people who could not fight back. I listened to a girl screaming for help while the ceiling collapsed on her friends. The Veldra did not care about our civilians. They did not hesitate for even 1 second. He turned to face her. This is not revenge. Revenge is emotional. This is a calculation. If we respond proportionally, the galaxy learns nothing. The Veldra learn nothing. The next species that thinks about attacking us learns nothing. But if we do this, if we show every civilization in the galaxy exactly what happens when you hurt our people, then no one will ever do it again." Mireille said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "I hope you are right." "So do I," Kyung-soo said, and he walked away, leaving her alone with the stars and the weight of what was coming. The air in the bunker was getting thin. Yuna could feel it in the way her breaths came a little shorter each hour, the way her head felt heavy and dull, and the way her thoughts moved slower than they should. The backup life support system hummed and clicked in the corner, pushing recycled air through vents that were not designed to keep 19 people alive for this long. It was doing its best. Its best was not going to be enough. The bunker was a single reinforced room, about the size of a large apartment back on Earth. It had been built deep below the surface of the outpost, surrounded by layers of rock and steel, designed to survive exactly the kind of attack that had just happened. It had emergency water, a basic medical kit, 2 portable lights, and nothing else. No food, no comfortable places to sleep, just gray walls and the faint vibration of the moon's geology pressing in on them from all sides. Taeho lay on the floor near the back wall. His back was swollen and dark purple where the support beam had hit him. Hana had given him painkillers from the medical kit, but they were the weak kind, meant for headaches, not for cracked ribs and bruised organs. He kept his eyes closed most of the time, but he was not asleep. He was listening to everything. The breathing of his crew, the sound of the life support, the occasional quiet words between survivors. He was counting his people. 19. He had started with 46. 27 were gone. Hana sat beside him and monitored the bunker's short-range communicator. It was too weak to reach anyone far away, but it could receive signals if someone came close enough. So far there was nothing but static. She kept it on anyway, the volume turned low, listening for anything that sounded like rescue. Wanjin sat against the opposite wall, his broken arm resting across his lap. Unji, the technician who had helped Yuna earlier, had fashioned a rough splint from a piece of metal shelving and strips torn from a uniform jacket. It was ugly, but it worked. Wanjin had not made a sound when she set the bone. He just nodded and told her to take care of the others first. Yuna sat with Somin, whose legs were badly bruised from the collapsed ceiling. Somin was trying not to cry, which made her cry more. Yuna held her hand and talked to her, because talking was the only thing she could do. "Tell me about Earth," Somin whispered. "Tell me something nice." Yuna thought for a moment. "Have you ever been to the East Coast? Busan?" Somin shook her head. "There is a beach there called Haeundae. In the summer the water is warm enough to swim in, and the sand is soft and white. At night, people set up little stalls along the boardwalk and sell grilled fish and sweet pancakes filled with red bean paste. You can smell the salt and the food all mixed together. And if you go early in the morning before the tourists wake up, you can sit on the sand and watch the sun come up over the ocean. It is so quiet, just you and the water and the light." Somin closed her eyes and smiled weakly. "That sounds nice." "It is," Yuna said. "When we get home, I will take you there." She said it like she believed it. She had to. Believing was the only fuel she had left. Hours passed. The air grew thinner. People slept in shifts, leaning against walls and each other. Taeho drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, Hana's communicator crackled. Everyone in the bunker went still. Hana pressed the device to her ear and listened. The static shifted, and then faintly, she heard a voice. A human voice. UHN frequency. Maru 7 bunker. This is UHN rescue convoy Falcon 3. We have your beacon. Hold your position. Estimated arrival, 8 hours. Repeat, 8 hours. Hold on. Hana looked at Taeho. He opened his eyes and met hers. He did not smile, but something in his face loosened, just slightly. "Tell them we are here," he said. "Tell them we are waiting." Far away, moving through the darkness of Veldra space, the stealth ship Docto was silent and invisible. It was a small ship, shaped like a flattened blade, coated in a layer of material that absorbed sensor signals and reflected nothing back. It did not use its main engines unless absolutely necessary. It drifted, adjusted, and drifted again, slipping through the spaces between Veldra patrol routes like a needle through fabric. The Nova device had to be deployed within a specific range of the target star. That range was close enough that when the star collapsed, the Docto would be caught in the gravitational pull. There was no version of this mission where they came home. Do-hyun had written a letter to his wife before they left the Baekdu. He had kept it short. He told her that he loved her and their son. He told her that what he was about to do was necessary. He told her not to be sad for too long, because their boy needed her to be strong. He sealed the letter and left it with a comm officer who promised to send it when the mission was confirmed complete. The Docto crossed the outer boundary of the Veldra home system. On the display, Do-hyun could see the star at the center, a large yellow sun, warm and bright. Around it, the Veldra homeworld turned slowly, a massive planet covered in sprawling cities and military installations. Orbital stations circled it like rings of steel. Thousands of ships moved through the system, military and civilian, going about the business of an empire. There were billions of people down there. Do-hyun knew this. He looked at the display for a long time. "Final checks," he said quietly. His voice was calm. The crew moved through the checklist. Power cells were at full capacity. The Nova device was armed and stable. Navigation was locked on the star's core. All systems were functioning within normal limits. The weapons officer, a young woman named Boyoung, confirmed the arming sequence and looked at Do-hyun. "Device is ready, Commander." Do-hyun opened a secure channel to the Baekdu. "Admiral, this is Docto. Payload is armed and ready. We are in position. On your order." Across the vast distance of space, the signal reached Kyungsoo on the bridge of the Baekdu. He was standing at the command table, his hands flat on the surface, his head slightly bowed. Every officer on the bridge was watching him. The silence was so complete that they could hear the hum of the ship's engines deep in the walls. Kyungsoo closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, his voice was steady and final. "Fire." The Docto released the Nova device. It was surprisingly small, no bigger than a shuttle's fuel pod, and it moved toward the star under its own power, accelerating faster and faster until it was just a bright point of light, disappearing into the glow of the Veldra sun. Then it hit the star's outer layers and burrowed inward, through the plasma, through the convection currents, down into the core where the fusion reactions burned at millions of degrees. And then the star began to die. On the surface of the Veldra homeworld, it started as a flicker. The sunlight dimmed for just a moment, like a cloud passing overhead. People looked up. Then the dimming continued. The sun, which had burned in their sky for billions of years, began to shrink, noticeably. Every second, it grew smaller. The sky, which had been bright and clear, started to darken. The color of the light changed from warm yellow to cold orange to a deep, terrible red. Alarms sounded across the planet. Military commanders shouted for reports. Scientists stared at their instruments in disbelief. Nothing in physics, nothing they had ever studied or imagined, could explain what was happening. Stars did not simply collapse. Stars did not shrink like dying embers. This was impossible. But it was happening. In her private study on the homeworld, scribe Lura was already standing at her window when the sky began to change. She had been reading the old intelligence files again. the ones from before the Dominion had ever made contact with humanity. She had found the report she was looking for, the one written by an analyst who had been dead for 200 years, the one with a single line circled in red ink. They remember everything and forgive nothing. She held the old document in her hands and watched the sun fold in on itself. It was smaller now than a moon. The darkness spread across the sky like ink in water. The temperature was already dropping. Frost began to form on the edges of her window. Somewhere below, she could hear screaming. The deep, ground-shaking rumble of tectonic stress groaned through the building as the planet's orbit began to fail, drawn inward by the shifting gravity of a star that was no longer there. Lura pressed her hand against the glass. It was cold. The last light of the dying sun reflected in her dark eyes, and then it was gone. The sky was black, completely, utterly, impossibly black. She whispered to the darkness, to no one, to everyone who had refused to listen. They warned us. On the Docto, Commander Dohyun watched the star disappear from his screen. The singularity formed exactly as predicted, a point of infinite density that began pulling everything within the system toward it. He could feel the ship shudder as the gravity shifted. He looked at his crew. Bo-young was crying silently. The navigator had his eyes closed. The engineer was holding a photo of his family. Do-hyun leaned back in his chair and spoke one last time into the communication system. Docto to Baekdu. Payload delivered. Target confirmed destroyed. It has been an honor. The channel went silent. The Docto was pulled into the void along with everything else. Within 7 minutes of activation, the Veldra home star, its planets, its moons, its orbital stations, and every living thing in the system ceased to exist. There was nothing left. Not rubble, not dust, not light. Just emptiness. Quiet, absolute emptiness, where a civilization used to be. The rescue ships arrived at Kale 4, with 6 hours of air left in the bunker. 3 fast cruisers dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and immediately deployed ground teams with heavy drilling equipment. It took them 40 minutes to cut through the collapsed wreckage above the bunker entrance, and open a path down to the sealed door. When the door finally opened, the first thing the rescue team saw was Lieutenant Hana standing on the other side, her face covered in dust and dried blood, holding a short-range communicator in one hand and a makeshift weapon in the other, a piece of metal pipe she had pulled from the wall, just in case whoever opened that door was not human. She lowered the pipe and exhaled. Took you long enough. They brought the survivors out, one at a time. The wounded went first, carried on stretchers, and loaded into medical shuttles that took them straight to the cruisers above. Taeho was lifted carefully, his back stabilized with emergency braces, his face pale, but his eyes open. He grabbed the arm of the medic carrying him and asked, "The signal, did they act on it?" The medic did not understand the question and told him to rest. Taeho did not ask again. He knew the answer would find him. Wonjin refused a stretcher. He walked out of the bunker on his own legs, his broken arm strapped to his chest, his uniform torn and blackened, his boots crunching over the rubble of the outpost he had maintained every day for 2 years. A rescue soldier offered him a hand. Wonjin looked at the hand, then at the ruins around him, and shook his head. He walked to the shuttle and climbed aboard without a word. Yuna was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway of the bunker and looked up through the jagged hole the rescue team had cut in the ceiling. Through it, she could see the sky of Kale 4, thin and gray and full of stars. The cold air of the moon hit her face, and she closed her eyes. She breathed in deeply, even though it burned, because it was new air, not the recycled staleness she had been breathing for the last day. She was alive. She was 20 years old, and she was alive, and 27 people she had eaten dinner with 2 days ago were not. She did not cry until she was on the shuttle. Then she cried so hard she could not breathe, and Salmon held her hand the way Yuna had held hers, in the bunker, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say. The news broke across the galaxy within hours. Every species with access to faster-than-light communication networks received the same two reports, almost simultaneously. The first was that the Veldra Dominion had launched an unprovoked military assault on a small human outpost in the Kale 4 sector, killing 27 people and wounding many more. The second was that the Veldra Homestar had ceased to exist. The entire home system of the Veldra Dominion, their ancient homeworld, their orbital infrastructure, their military garrison of 2,000 ships, and billions of their citizens, was simply gone. Sensor data from a dozen different species confirmed it. Where there had been a star, there was now a gravitational anomaly, a void, an absence. The galaxy did not know how to react. Some species responded with horror. Others responded with disbelief. A few, the ones who had suffered under Veldra domination for centuries, the ones who had lost their own worlds to Veldra invasions and never received justice, those species said nothing publicly. But in private, in quiet rooms and sealed communications, they breathed out for the first time in generations. The Veldra Dominion's remaining colonies, cut off from their homeworld and their central military command, surrendered within days. There was no one left to give orders, no one left to fight for. The Dominion that had terrorized a quarter of the galaxy for 500 years collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. It simply fell. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. It was held in the Great Chamber on the neutral station of Alios, a massive circular room designed to hold representatives from every known civilization. On the day of the session, every seat was filled. Every species had sent their highest-ranking diplomats. The room hummed with 100 different languages, all of them asking the same question. What had the humans done, and how could anyone feel safe now? Humanity sent a single representative. Admiral Kyungsu appeared via holographic projection from the bridge of the Baekdu. He stood at the center of the chamber, his image tall and clear, his uniform pressed and perfect. His face showed nothing. The council chair, a member of the Alori species, opened the session and invited Kyungsu to speak. Every eye, every sensor, every recording device was focused on the human admiral. Kyungsu did not begin with words. He pressed a control on his wrist, and the chamber's main display activated. The 16-minute recording from Outpost Maru 7 played from beginning to end. Every delegate watched the bombardment. They heard the shields failing. They heard the railgun fire and fall silent. They heard the screams. They watched the corridors collapse. They saw the smoke and the blood and the desperate hands pulling wounded crew through the wreckage. They heard Yuna calling for help. They saw the static when the cameras died. When it ended, Kyungsu let the silence hold for 10 seconds. Then he spoke. I will not apologize for what we did. I understand that many of you are frightened. I understand that some of you think we are monsters. You are welcome to feel that way. But I want you to understand something clearly. He paused and looked around the chamber, his holographic eyes meeting the faces of species that had watched the Veldra conquer and destroy for centuries without lifting a finger. Every species in this room knew what the Veldra were. You knew they had destroyed 3 civilizations. You knew they were expanding. You knew they attacked anyone weaker than themselves. And you did nothing. You held council sessions. You passed resolutions. You expressed concern. And while you expressed concern, people died. Species died. Entire worlds were erased. And you looked the other way, because it was easier than standing up. His voice hardened, but he did not raise it. He did not need to. We are not like you. When someone hurts our people, we do not hold a session. We do not express concern. We act. What you saw in that recording was a small outpost with 46 people, cooks and technicians, and a 20-year-old private on her first deployment. They were not soldiers on a battlefield. They were our people, doing their jobs in a place they thought was safe, and the Veldra killed 27 of them, without warning, without cause, and without mercy. He straightened his back. So we responded, and we responded in a way that the galaxy will remember. Not because we wanted to, not because we enjoyed it. We did it because we needed every species in this room to understand one simple thing. He let the words land like stones. Our people are not targets. They are not acceptable losses. They are not pieces on your board. Every single one of them matters. And if any species, any fleet, any government ever touches one of them again, they will learn the same lesson the Veldra did. There will be no warning. There will be no negotiation. There will be nothing. The chamber was silent. Not a single delegate spoke. Not a single objection was raised. Kyung-Soo's hologram flickered and then stabilized. His voice softened, just slightly. We did not come to the stars to make enemies. We came to trade, to build, to explore, and to find friends. We still want that, but we will not be prey, not ever. He ended the transmission. His image disappeared from the chamber. The council sat in silence for a long time. No resolution was passed that day. None was needed. 6 months later, Yuna returned to Kale 4. She came on a civilian transport, alone, and landed near the site where Outpost Maru 7 had once stood. A memorial had been built there, a simple wall of black stone with 27 names carved into it, the names of every person who had died in the attack. Flowers and small tokens had been left at its base by people who had visited before her. Yuna knelt in front of the wall and read every name. Ji-hwan, Soman's friend Dasom. The 2 engineers who had argued about which city had the best food. The medic who had always kept candy in his pocket. The communications tech who had played guitar in the recreation room every evening. 27 names, 27 lives. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 27 small, smooth stones. One by one, she placed them in a circle at the base of the memorial. It was an old tradition, one her grandmother had taught her, a way of saying that the dead were not forgotten, that someone still carried them. When she placed the last stone, she stood up and looked at the sky. The stars were clear and cold above the barren moon. Somewhere out there, the void where the Veldra homeworld used to be was still pulling at the fabric of space, a permanent scar in the galaxy. We came out here hoping to find friends, she said quietly, to the stars, to the names on the wall, to the silence. I am sorry it turned out this way. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned, walked back to her transport, and went home. The galaxy never forgot what happened at Kale 4, and what followed. In the years that came, humanity continued to do what it had always done. They traded, they built, they smiled and shook hands, and asked about your culture and your family. They were kind, they were curious, they were generous with their knowledge and their time. And every species they met treated them with warmth and respect, and just a small, quiet note of caution. Because the galaxy had learned something it would never unlearn. The quiet ones were not quiet because they were weak. They were quiet because they already knew exactly what they were capable of. And they carried that knowledge with them every single day, like a weight they hoped they would never have to set down again. But they would, if they had to.